Good morning. As you already heard, my name is Lea Grüter and I'm a provenance researcher specialized in Nazi-looted art at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. It's an honor for me to open today's program on tracing contested histories with my presentations to those who come after, Parrhesia of Traces, in which we will try to confront what we are forgetting in provenance gaps. And to begin with, I'd like you to imagine something. Imagine you're sitting in your living room, on one of your chairs, okay? And you're drinking coffee from a cup you always drink your coffee from, or tea if you prefer tea. And maybe there's some kind of artwork or decoration hanging on the wall. Maybe it means something to you. Maybe it reminds you of a person or an experience, or you really like the thought behind it. Or you just simply like the way it makes your room look. So, when the coffee is empty and the cup disappears, the chair vanishes, the artwork is no longer there, and you're gone, what remains of you then? My research is about looking at this absence. It focuses on an absence inscribed by crime. The crime of someone coming to your home with the intention to eradicate you, to destroy every trace on your existence, your individuality, your impact on and connection to the world, and to ensure that it will never be known that you, your world, or even this crime ever existed. And as we already heard, in 1998, 42 countries signed the Washington Principles, committing to fair and just solutions for Nazi-looted art still in public collections. These principles recognized that looting as part of the Holocaust wasn't just theft. It was a systematic part of genocide. It wasn't just about the material dispossession, but a structural method of erasure. So provenance research developed from this framework tries to re-establish an ownership chain to identify this loss. So, let's take a quick look at this sketch. It's an Italian 16th century drawing of 6 designs for pentateuchs, the floating angels. So from the museum inventory, I know a few things about its ownership history. There's a stamp on the lower right, marking it as a collection El Polack. Next to it is a small pencil number, and in 1955, the drawing was acquired by a gallery in London by the museum. But where was it between 33 and 45, or 1933 and 45? That remains unknown. Even after searching databases and literature, there's no trace of its whereabouts during those years. And that is one of the central problems of provenance research. We often cannot reconstruct a complete transaction, like in this case. So the fundamental question then is, how do we recognize historical injustice in the absence of records? And there are actually 2 main reasons for this absence. And the first is time and natural distortion, so records get lost and archives deteriorate. And the second, you already saw it, is the deliberate erasure in case of theft. So in persecution-related loss, transaction often left no paper trail. So, as you might have known, the Nazis meticulously documented their gains, but erased the evidence of the actual crime. Like what remains are inventories, sales records, and custom declarations, documents that show the object's movement in best case scenario, but no records of threat, of violence, or forced sales that caused the actual dispossession. So these bureaucratic records obscure the genocidal nature of the actions taken. And this creates an inherent imbalance. So the paper trail of looted artworks, when it exists, is often clearer than the records of the original owner. The crime itself, the act of dispossession and destruction of a social order, leaves gaps in the ownership chain. So one could say that this imbalance is a form of social forgetting embedded in the records. So to truly detect and also really understand problematic provenance gaps, we must look beyond ownership documents and recognize the social and structural forces that created the gaps. These photos from Nuremberg Fürth, taken during the November pogroms of 1938, are striking in this context. They provide a rare visual record of what is often obscured in bureaucratic documents and cannot be seen in provenance gaps. The intersection of personal material loss and structural violence. So these images document the destruction of private homes. They're targeting both lives and privacy. So upon closer inspection, we notice paintings left hanging on the walls, silent witnesses to the violence. While we do not directly see the theft, the context makes it clear. The November pogroms were part of a coordinated effort to expropriate and annihilate. These images reveal how the broader destruction of Jewish life was inseparable from this possession. By examining them, we uncover how violence is embedded in both the object's disrupted journey and the gaps within its provenance. And the Nazi regime was not just a top-down dictatorship. Its crimes were carried out by a web of institutions, individuals, and profiteers operating within the structural regulations. Expropriation and the neglect of its violence was invisibly embedded in the social order. So the photographs, for example, were taken by a photojournalist accompanying the SR, normalizing the destruction. The smiles of the SR men as they carry off books show a selective preservation of events through the camera lens. And then there's a series of photos that I hesitate to show, because they're featuring people in their pajamas, in their ransacked homes. And I don't know their names, and I don't know if they want to be seen by us in this position. The crime put them in this situation, not only stole their belongings, but also tried to strip them of their dignity and also intimacy. But then there's one image I want to show because it reveals something crucial. A woman stands next to a man whose forehead is wounded, his shirt stained with blood. They are flanked by two younger men, all staring at the aggressor's camera. One of the young man's gaze is particularly striking. He looks directly at the intruder, challenging us to confront the crime we cannot see happening just beyond the frame. The crime erased not only traces of itself, but also of people's agency. Yet in this moment, we perceive both, confronted with each other, and they're not the same. They are distinct fragments within the same absence of provenance, fragments we must learn to distinguish. So we must recognize not only the loss of homes and objects, but also the man behind the camera attempting to objectify, and the unbreakable dignity of those looking back. Both are part of the gap. The crime sought to erase them, but just because we cannot see them in the ownership chain doesn't mean they're not there. The November pogrom are often remembered through broken glass of Jewish shop, there's this Kristallnacht or Crystal Night term, and burning synagogues. These events left visible public material traces, just as the paintings in these photos that might later appear in museums. However, the historian Wolf Gruner highlights something often overlooked, a social pattern in the systematic destruction of private homes, described in oral survivor testimonies. Gruner writes, "Their accounts sounded eerily similar. When paramilitary Nazi troops broke down their doors, it was as if a bomb had exploded. Men slashed mattresses, hacked furniture into pieces, and destroyed everything in sight." This destruction, often accompanied by sexual violence, beatings, and murder, left fewer visible traces than the burned synagogues. Our photos echo these accounts and underscore their structural nature. The destruction of private homes represent a gap in historical memory, much like the unidentified gaps in provenance research that arise when we fail to account for the missing social context that the objects point us to. So to truly understand problematic gaps in provenance, we must recognize the social, and I would also say the societal, forgetting inscribed in them. And there is first the forgetting of traces of the individual, because the personal presence, agency, also ownership of the dispossessed social member disappeared from the records. Then second, the forgetting of traces of structural violence, because of the broader societal mechanisms that enabled and structured the crime, systematic dispossession, destruction, and bureaucratic erasure remain hidden. But by their very nature, they can reoccur in patterns like we've seen in this survivor accounts. And then third, as a result of those first two forms of forgetting, the loss of connection. Because both the personal and structural traces are missing, we lose our ability to reconnect with the history through the artifact itself, which could otherwise help us understand the lost social fabric. And by recognizing these forms of social forgetting, we can begin to see the gaps in provenance, not as simple missing pieces, but as the product of historical violence and systematic erasure. So now, let's explore some concrete examples that illustrate how these forms of forgetting, erasure of people, structural violence, and distorted history manifest in historical records. These brief examples will demonstrate how the crime has been obscured and distorted over time and space. Afterwards, we'll return to the sketch drawing from the beginning and apply the Parrhesia of Traces, the search for remnants of what was deliberately made forgotten at the moment of theft. The silence of objects. In 1949, paintings returned from Germany were displayed by the Dutch government at the Rijksmuseum for survivors to reclaim their looted property. What's missing becomes painfully clear when we consider the photos from the November pogrom. Just 4 years after the Holocaust, these paintings no longer reflect the violence they endured and witnessed. Survivors returning from concentration camps and hiding had to prove ownership to reclaim them, something the crime had erased. So the absence of personal traces coupled with Europe's post-war communicative silence about the Holocaust distorts our understanding of the violence. The disconnect from the social fabric is evident in these paintings. Perpetrator distortions. The 1946 Nuremberg trials, held in the same city where our photos were taken, brought to light the actions of high-ranking Nazi officials. Figures such as Seyss Inquart, the Rijkscommissaris of the Netherlands, referred to art looting as securing and liquidating enemy property, thereby completely distorting the nature of the crime. Interestingly, this kind of language was also used by museums, including the Rijksmuseum and the Louvre, which labeled looted art they acquired as formerly Jewish property, claiming it had to be safeguarded for the country to prevent it from being lost to Germany. And that brings us to disciplinary distortions. In 1938, now parallel in time, but distant in space from our photos, Rijksmuseum director Frederik Schmidt-Degener at that time was asked by the Dutch government to evaluate applications from German Jewish refugees. And in this application he stated, this is one of the many German art dealers whose work is made impossible in their homeland, who wish to establish themselves here. Because of the new German regulations, these people do not bring any German clientele. In this response, Schmidt-Degener's institutional and disciplinary perspective, detached from the social and political context, filtered out the violence and persecution the refugees had experienced. His transnational distance, focusing on the professional and economic aspects, obscured the broader social and humanitarian crisis they were facing, a crisis well known at that time in the Netherlands. At the same time, the museum accepted donations from German Jewish refugees. I think this example illustrates how disciplinary knowledge in records can distort our understanding. It also highlights the often overlooked need to read forgetting on a transnational level. So by reading the gaps and distortions, we begin to see how crimes and their aftermath erased individuality and social connections from records. And in this sense, when you look at the drawing from the beginning now, what would you look for that you do not see? Maybe we always start with one question that I think is very relevant to keep asking over and over again. What is my actual question? What is the key question I want to answer in my research? Then what leads do I have to answer the question? Like here, maybe also systematic of the traces of the crime may be left that don't make sense in the context of the painting, but become relevant within a restructured social fabric surrounding the object, like custom seals or single numbers. Then, are there links between these leads? What is the context? Leading us to what gaps exist in the provenance, and what might these gaps tell us? Most important, what is not told? So now, we shift our approach to focus on finding traces of both individuals and patterns of crime. By analyzing these gaps, we can uncover the broader social implications in historical context. First, finding the traces of a social member. Some years ago, I conducted provenance research on this drawing, and the first clue I followed was the stamp, Ludwig Pollack's, which is printed on the drawing. Pollack was an archaeologist and antiquities dealer from Prague who lived in Rome and amassed a private collection of about 3,000 drawings. He proudly sent his collector's stamp featuring a sculpture he attributed to Fritz Lucht himself, making it identifiable. Pollack's diaries, which stop in the 1930s, provide a personal insight into his dedication to preserving the integrity of collections. The author Margarete Guldan, who studied these diaries, describes how Pollack's entire being was devoted to collecting and how deeply fascinated he was by it. It filled him with pride and joy to join the ranks of Roman private collectors. His passion lay in the idea, the exchange, and the knowledge embedded in diverse private study collections of drawings. When collections, he knew, were dispersed in all directions after the collector's death, Pollack felt sorrow. At one point in his diary, he remarked on this, "Sic transit gloria mundi," thus passes the glory of the world. Second, the traces of the societal structure dimension of crime committed against the social member. The Fondation Custodia writes on its website about Pollack's collector's mark that Pollack got deported. They proceed, after his death, the drawings were sold by Roman dealers or auctioneers in New York, but this chapter of his collection still remains in the shadows. Pollack was arrested during the Sabato Nero, Black Saturday, raid in Rome, October 1943. A witness described this raid as follows. Everywhere you hear the heartbreaking cries and pleas of the victims, while the thugs, some violent, some indifferent, perform their duty without any sign of human pity. Those being taken away yell what seemed to me instructions to the remaining behind. It all seemed like a scene out of purgatory. Ludwig Pollack and his entire immediate family, including his 3 children, were murdered in Auschwitz, and his home was looted. What remained of his collection was later donated by his sister-in-law to a museum in Rome. Margarete Guldan told me she's unaware of any sales of drawings by Pollack from his private collections, from his diaries. Pollack is known to have begun selling parts of his collections in 1938, again, when Italy's racial laws were enacted and he needed money for his living expenses. 3. The forgetting of our ability to reconnect to this social fabric through the artifact. Despite recent publications on Pollack's life, his stamp drawings continue to appear on the art market, disconnected from his personal history. These are only examples from this year, they're online right now, and last year. Patterns in the drawings. One of the drawings' provenance lists Prague, Vienna, Rome, no Auschwitz. One provenance citing Austrian family collection. Pencil numbers of the drawing suggest a collection context, with some reaching into the hundreds, like on our drawing in the beginning. The art market offerings always list the stamp as only provenance source, never a direct source for a transaction from Ludwig Pollack. So Pollack's entire family was killed, and no known descendants or claimants seek for his collection. His apartment was plundered, and his drawings surfaced on the art market right after his death. Where there's no direct record or evidence of theft, it's unlikely that all 3,000 drawings he cherished were sold voluntarily. The structural gaps in the records of these drawings currently circulating on the art market strongly suggest that many were expropriated. Despite the absence of direct theft documentations, patterns emerge that strongly indicate loss and erasure. Pollard's drawings circulate on the art market precisely because there's no individual proof of expropriation for each individual drawing. But if provenance research isolates thefts without considering the broader context, the victim's agency and those who've profited, it risks overlooking the structural forces that enable these crimes. And this presents a paradox. So how do we address the sale of an individual drawing without direct evidence of theft? This paradox illustrates the complexities of provenance research, where the absence of clear records does not erase the broader historical realities. Provenance research is not just about uncovering the path of objects, but about recognizing the crimes that shaped those journeys. It's about understanding the histories we've forgotten and finding the traces that bring them back to light. Only then we recognize and also challenge the structural and social dimension of the crime. Forgetting is not just the absence of memory, it's an active process that shapes what we remember and how we engage with the past. If we fail to read the silences and the patterns around them, we risk perpetuating the structures that erase them. Sic transit gloria mundi. Thus passes the glory of the world. 80 years after the Holocaust, we continue to examine these objects in museum, reflecting on what we see and searching for fair and just solutions. Yet, there's no solution to absence. As provenance researchers, our role is to confront what we're forgetting. Objects cannot speak for themselves, but we can listen to the traces they carry, the distortions, the erasures, and ask, what shall remain? Thank you very much.